You are listening to Rouge Radio, a proud member of the Canadian Football Podcast Network.
It's time to get the point as Rouge Radio is ready to kick off.
Ready!
The best football talk with the best in the business.
So what is the cost? You have 2 first-round picks this year because the Argonauts are dumb enough to trade for Drew Willie.
A few rookies.
We go directly to the on-field product. We welcome to the show the 20th overall pick in this past Sunday's CFL draft, DeAndre Wright of the Alouettes. DeAndre, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
And the occasional Hall of Famer.
Please welcome Doug Brown, who is one of the members of the current class of 2016 in the CFL Hall of Fame. Doug, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, guys, for the kind words and for having me on the program.
Rouge Radio is on the air. Here's your hosts, Robert Dalton and Tony Allen.
Well, wouldn't you know it? We've talked about this in past podcasts, past episodes, that, you know, when we talk about everything CFL and then we go off the track and that seems to be the takeaway. And we talked about last week about how awesome our sound is. And then we're inundated with email and tweets and comments galore about how the sound has improved, but nothing about our CFL football takes. It's the Rouge Radio Podcast, episode 429, powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network. My name is Robert Dalton, and joining me in Medicine Hat, I'm assuming it's Medicine Hat, Alberta this week, the man, the myth, the legend. Hello, Mr. Thompson. No, I'm just joking. That's just a shout out to last week's podcast, last week's episode. Tony Allen, how's it going, Tony?
It's going really good. Nice week off. Listen to a couple of CFL podcasts because everyone's kind of slowly making their way back into the mix with free agency happening last week. So that was nice. And I am just absorbing as much Olympic coverage as I can in the past week and ready for another week of that.
Yeah, you're just like so involved or like absorbing yourself with the Olympics.
Well, I have a kid that loves the Olympics, right? So that's why she loves it, which means I watch it with her, talk her through the events if she doesn't understand how they work, and she's just all about the Olympics right now, and I love it.
Before we talk about, obviously, the key thing that happened this past week is free agency. Family, we had a family movie night the last couple of nights. Our stepson came back to visit before everything kind of opened up here in Manitoba. So we're like, so might as well get the visiting out of the way before we kind of isolate ourselves again. Because of the Conservatives. But this is not a political show. Anyway, so Friday night, the family and I, we watched, thanks to the good people of Disney Plus, we watched Avengers Infinity War. Got my 5-year-old, she was so obsessed with Spider-Man. And I probably should have got her ready, prepared. The movie came out in 2018, so hopefully at this point in 2022, if I say anything, I don't have to worry about spoilers, do I? No?
You shouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
All right, so as everything happens, there's something happens, and half of the universe goes, it dusts away. I guess that's what the description is, including the one and only Spider-Man. So I look over to my 5-year-old, and she is just absolutely bawling and I can't do. We got to turn off the movie now. I feel bad. I should have got it prepared. So then the next night we watch Avengers Endgame, and again this movie came out in 2019. So if you haven't watched it, that's your own fault. It's 2022. Come on. Anyway, so for the whole movie, every 5 minutes, is Spider-Man coming? Spider-Man. Just watch the movie. Just watch the movie. And then finally, when he came back, and I look over, and it was a proud parent of moment almost. Like she was just so into it. It was like she had won, like her team won the Stanley Cup or her team won the Grey Cup. It was just like a fascinating feeling. Just it was just warmed my heart that she was a 5-year-old just being so into a character like that. So your daughter likes the Olympics. My daughter likes Spider-Man and hates that she died for a year.
There you go.
Technically, in chronological time, it was 5 years, but I digress. Anyway, so some big news coming out. Obviously, the Super Bowl happened to today. Did you happen to catch the game, or at least the halftime show, which seems to be the most popular part of the game?
No, nothing. I had to look up what the actual score was. I didn't even know the game was over. Everything was just the halftime show, and I didn't see a single tweet or Facebook post or get a notification because I don't follow the NFL on any of my sports apps. Like I'm like, oh, I wonder what the score is, and I saw the score. I'm like, oh, it's over. So I have no idea what happened, other than that the Rams won.
Yeah, and as close. I mean, if they recolored their jersey, and made it gold, it would have been the second team in blue and gold to win a football championship in 3 months. So,
yeah.
Not to rub it in, being a little bit more insufferable as my Bombers are back-to-back Grey Cup champions, but. Just had to throw that in there. No, it was the halftime show. My wife was a little ill, and she came downstairs to watch just the half. She cares nothing about the football game, but she was reliving her 20s all over again. So it was a good time. It was a good show, actually, to be honest with you. And
honestly, that group of artists, I couldn't tell you a single song title between all 5 of them combined. I might, if I try to say a Snoop Dogg song, it might be like a line from the song, but I don't know if that's actually the name of Snoop Dogg's songs. That wasn't my wheelhouse when I was in college or whatever. That wasn't my jam. I don't know a single song between any of them combined. If the concert had been like Bon Jovi with Motley Crue, Poison, and Aerosmith, I might have been there to watch. But yeah, those names, I know what they are, but they mean nothing to me.
Well, to me, I mean, yeah, rap and hip hop, not necessarily my wheelhouse either, but it's just it just felt nostalgic just to go through.
Yeah.
And these are big names. And obviously, me being a Bengals fan, I was left disappointed. So
yeah,
there's that. So we're not going to talk more about that, but we're going to talk about CFL free agency. A little bit different than normally. Where we might say someone might have won free agency, but we'll just go through each team and kind of just a quick synopsis about how each team did. The BC Lions. The BC Lions had a very good first day of free agency. Most notably coming in was Michael O'Connor, Canadian quarterback Michael O'Connor, Stephen Richardson, Delvin Breaux, Daniel Peterman, Matthew Betts, I was trying to think of Lucius Purifoy. Defensively, I think they made some good waves. They improved their run defense with Stephen Richardson. Lucius Purifoy, still a versatile defensive player. I love that move. The one thing, though, that I will not really care for is the one thing that I think I might have mentioned this last week. BC really needed to commit to the run game, and they did the complete opposite. They committed to the defensive run game, which is great, but as we saw last year, when you don't have an offensive line that could pass protect like they did, and they didn't prove that, They just added a quarterback. That's essentially offensively. That's essentially what they did. I tweeted out with Michael O'Connor and Nathan Rourke, a combine is that they have like a 65 completion percentage, which isn't bad. Under 1,000 yards throwing, 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. That's not good for a rookie, but that's combined for their 2 Canadian quarterbacks. Now they signed Isaac Harker from Saskatchewan. I don't know how that's gonna fit in. Now I'm not going to be a Debbie Downer here because I love the idea of a Canadian quarterback duo. I really love it. It just has to make sense, and for this, it doesn't make sense. I know what they're trying to do. You're putting together a roster to have a feel-good story, but again, a feel-good story would be to have this team make the playoffs. And I don't know if the moves that they made so far by free agency does that job. They solidified the defense, which is great. Defense wasn't really a huge issue last year in 2021 for the BC Lions, and they never really fixed that. What do you think?
Yeah, I didn't see any, like, well, you can't see additions to the offense. I shouldn't say I didn't see it, because you just have to look at the list. And I guess they're just going for that angle that, they might have enough offensive weapons. They might be able to add it in American tryout camps for the rest of the winter, and hope that the offense will figure itself out. And right now, maybe expect to see some low-scoring games when you play the BC Lions.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was thinking. Defensively, they're good against the run, at least on paper. Through the air, I don't know if there was any improvements, but that wasn't really their downfall last year. Offensively, if they got Sean White, so even at the worst case scenario, if they get it to the 45-yard line, that's almost a guaranteed field goal. So I mean, there's that. I mean, we can make that joke as long as we can. But I think the biggest move was them getting Steven Richardson. When you can actually get a team or a player from a Grey Cup champion, and one that was actually impactful like Richardson, that's the right move. So I think for BC, that was the most impactful player that they would have signed. Moving on to let's go to the Calgary Stampeders, and the Calgary Stampeders didn't really do that much. They brought in, or they re-signed Fraser Sopik. They brought in Eli Buka from the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and I don't know if we made this particular announcement, but they made a trade that sent the rights to Royce Mitchie to Toronto in exchange for Cameron Judge, who re-signed. So I guess you could say that is an addition by free agent, because he was a pending free agent, but not exactly the move that I was kind of looking for. I know we talked about it, that John Hufnagel likes to do a status quo in regards to his scouting, but we probably thought that he should go into free agency and maybe make not a huge splash, but maybe a couple of splashes, just because of where that team stands. Didn't look like they did. Do you still see the Calgary Stampeders as a bona fide threat to the Western Division at this point?
Well, I think we saw the Calgary Stampeders do what they do. This is, you look at their list, and that's what you're going to see every year. So I don't think we saw anything different from the Calgary Stampeders when we did this show last week. I just said we didn't have that ball-hawking defense, the defense that scored touchdowns and wins games for them like they had, a couple of seasons ago. But on the same note, my point was you need to make those additions on the defense, and that's really all that Hufnagel did, was go out and grab a couple of guys to see if it could bolster their defense at all. And last week, when I thought that maybe we were going to make some predictions of where free agents goes, I had DJ Lalama going to the Calgary Stampeders, and that one worked out. So I wish I had more evidence that I had predicted that one, so I could actually look intelligent. But I mean, overall, it was a regular free agency for Calgary. I don't know why anybody would tweet out, "Come on, Hufnagel, do something," like they do with Treliving and the Flames. But Hufnagel doesn't, and we'll see what he brings in to training camp and how it affects the team. But like I said, last week I said if Hufnagel makes moves, it'll try to make that defense look a little bit more secure than it was last season, and whether these additions will improve them in that way. He did exactly what I kind of said he was going to do, try and do some defensive stuff and hope that makes the difference.
Yeah, and to me, it's just the final thoughts on that one. I mean, I'm not surprised that Calgary didn't make any moves, just because that's been their MO for as long as we can remember. It's just that they lose a lot of players. They lost a few players this year through free agency, and sometimes you just have to recoup what you lost, and Calgary didn't do that. And I know that we're in Huff we trust, right? That's the thing that we see online eventually, and we've seen that in the last couple of years, is that in Huff we trust has resulted in the Calgary Stampeders bowing out in the Western Semi each year, and in one case it just wasn't close. So I thought, to fix that, might as well just add something at even for a 1-year deal, right? So I mean, I love the re-signings, but eventually you're just re-signing people that failed twice before, right? I mean, eventually you're going to have to, swallow your pride and just bite the bullet and just, do what other teams do. Maybe not go balls to the wall like the Edmonton Elks did. I mean, Edmonton, BC, and Ottawa, those were 3 teams that had to because they missed the playoffs. But Edmonton went a different route because, my God, if you ever run out of money and your kids are, they're still young, tell them to be a wide receiver because that is almost a guaranteed $300,000 payday, as the Edmonton Elks shelled that out to Kenny Lawler. Great receiver, was the only receiver last year that went over 1,000 yards in 2021. I don't know that he was worth $300,000. Like I said, I don't know who I said this with. If you're going to pay that much money to a non-quarterback player, he better be a Canadian offensive lineman, or he better be a game changer. I like Kenny Lawler, probably one of the top 3 receivers in the CFL, top 5 at the very least. He's not a game changer. Definitely not a game changer. So that was the one move that kind of had me going, oh, okay. I get why they have the cap space given their quarterback situation. I don't know if paying Kenny Lawler is going to be the reason why Edmonton makes the playoffs, should they make the playoffs in 2022. The big name outside of that one is Dion Lacey going back to the Edmonton Elks, as well as Toby Antigua rejoining Chris Jones. Any other news or notes that kind of jumped out at you in regards to the Edmonton Elks, Tony?
No, and the fact that we've seen, this is probably the second time in 4 seasons we've seen Edmonton try to go all in on free agency, and has yet, when they brought in Trevor Harrison, it is yet to take the Elks anywhere. And if nothing else, the organization takes steps backwards, whether or not they can put it together. And it's probably the same thing I'll say when we get to the Redblacks, is it's great to go out and do this, but unlike some sports, particularly baseball, maybe hockey to a degree, where you can just go out and get amazing players and you'll have instant results, football is very much team-oriented, knowing where the guy beside you is going to be, knowing where your receivers are going to go, and just throwing a bunch of football players together and expecting it to be magic. I mean, we've seen Hamilton try it and fail all the time. When Winnipeg tried it, it usually ended up in failure. It wasn't until they started building up their team that we see the dominant football team we have now. And same with the Saskatchewan teams that were good. It was keeping the players you have, bringing in new guys, but giving them chance to gel. And I don't expect to see a great season out of the Edmonton Elks next year based on what they did.
Yeah, and going back to the BC Lions too, it's like there's a reason you missed the playoffs, and I don't know if the moves that you made really improved that, right? Like, okay, you improved in other facets, but those weren't really the holes that you needed to fill. Like, there was, like, you're almost trying to put a square in a round hole, or square peg in a round hole, or vice versa. It just seems that you're just making moves just to say that, hey, we're making moves. Saskatchewan Roughriders made some big news. Obviously, the key exits were Ed Gainey, Michael Johnson, but the key players going back in, I believe, Darnell Sankey from Calgary and Derek Moncrief from Edmonton. And obviously, I think day one of free agency, Jonathan Woodward was released to go to the NFL. So right there's some key holes on that defense, and they have yet to at least show me that that they're willing to retool that offensive line that is sorely needed if Saskatchewan wants to take that next step into their trails to the Grey Cup. But knowing what we know right now, what they had, Is there anything that stood out to you? Maybe that what Saskatchewan did, like what's the big move that they made, or maybe there's still a big move that hasn't been made yet. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if the big move is coming. I like the addition of Sankey because even if you go through all the departures from Calgary, another long list, there was only about one significant one, and it was the Sankey one. Other ones were kind of, he's a good player, but he's not irreplaceable, and I think that was the best pickup for the Saskatchewan Roughriders on a day where they didn't really seem interested in reshaping of the image of their team too much.
Yeah, and I have no problems with the moves that they made. I mean, I know that, a lot of people are saying that they now have one of the best linebacking cores in the league, and they could be right. They've got Larry Dean, Micah Teitz, Darnell Sankey, and I know there's one more, and I can't. The name escapes me, but they're going to have a very good linebacking crew going out in 2022. But Cody Fajardo still has issues with the 50-50 ball. Now you can't fix that through free agency, but is there a backup quarterback that is available? And because if Cody Fajardo is as okay as he is, if he goes down, you're toast. You can have all the great receivers there, and they have some really good receivers, probably top 3 in the league. It doesn't mean anything if your offensive line can't block. And now they're without William Powell too. And I know that they were in on Andrew Harris, and we'll get that a little bit when we talk Winnipeg. Jamal Morrow, he's a very good return guy. I don't know if he's going to be that great of a running back. And even if you throw in Keenan LaFrance, who has shown that Keenan LaFrance is not a consistent year-to-year running back. He's a very good, substitute type running back. But if you hand him the ball, pound it with him, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think that is huge hole for Saskatchewan to fill. Now, maybe they'll prove me wrong in regards to Morrow and see what he can do. There isn't anything available other than hope that they have in Saskatchewan that would tell me that they're on solid ground in that respect. And at that point, we might actually see a regression in Saskatchewan, which sucks because they are in a Grey Cup hosting year. That would, in free agency, it's always sometimes the team that hosts the Grey Cup that goes all in unless you miss the playoffs. Let's go to a little bit more east. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, defending reigning Grey Cup champions. Key departures, Kenny Lawler and Andrew Harris. Key signings, and I know a lot of people will bring up Taekwon Glass. I think the big one would be Greg Ellingson, former multi-thousand-yard receiver, replacing a guy, probably half the price too as well, outgoing Kenny Lawler. We want to talk about the name that jumps out at you. I think obviously Greg Ellingson is the name that jumps out at you because it's probably the only name. But Winnipeg replaced the hole with a very decent receiver who needs a bounce back year from 2021. That defense, still scary on the front seven, still scary. And Andrew Harris no longer there. I think that was the big story as well. But knowing what Winnipeg has in Brady Oliveira and Johnny Augustine, if there's a regression, it's not going to be noticeable in my opinion. Tony, what do you think?
The Andrew Harris loss isn't surprising, and I think we can all agree it was one of the biggest names in free agent, which makes it a big topic because it was Andrew Harris. What a name to be throwing around in free agency. But I don't think the most dramatic for the reason you said. We could see that Winnipeg was very well off in the backfield, so it's fun to talk about. It made a lot of waves, literally just because it was Andrew Harris. And outside of that, Winnipeg, the quietest team, maybe even quieter than Calgary, because Ellingson is not a good replacement for Lawler. Like it's not even a reasonable replacement for Lawler. He was a great football player. Having said that, if you're looking to get cheaper, then Winnipeg's hands were tied. Like they need to be a Grey Cup contender, and they'll need to shed some salary to be able to do that. So Lawler was a bad loss for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Ellingson isn't a replacement, even close. And I think that's just at the face value. Does that make Winnipeg worse going into 2022? Time will tell. But, I mean, that was your biggest loss to me when I look at Winnipeg. Maybe Darvin Adams as well. But again, you're talking about receivers. These guys are a dime a dozen in the Canadian Football League, regardless how amazing they are. But we need to analyze what happened on free agency. Winnipeg, I think, to me personally, I feel like Lawler was their biggest loss. But what does that really mean for Winnipeg, who's a team that is just so strong they could lose a player like Lawler?
Yeah. And this, yeah, it wasn't to say that the drop off from Lawler and to Ellingson isn't noticeable. That wasn't the point. It goes back to what I was talking about, Kenny Lawler being a game changer. He's not a game changer. He's a great receiver, like I said, top 5. And you're replacing him with Ellingson, who probably fell out of the top 10 last year. I think that's a fair assessment. So you're definitely having some sort of regression, but I just think that offense in Winnipeg doesn't go through Kenny Lawler like it did in years previous where it went through Andrew Harris. It's just that he's a good player in a good offensive scheme, and put in Greg Ellingson, I'll go on because of the situations. Ellingson may actually put up more yards than Kenny Lawler in Edmonton. That's not to say that Ellingson's better. Is that the offense in Winnipeg will end up being better than the offense in Edmonton? And if you're actually going to pay $150,000 as opposed to $300,000 for that, and by the way, the $150,000 is just pure speculation. I have no idea what Ellingson is getting paid for this 1-year deal, but you're at least you're getting half of what Kenny Lawler is getting. So by that standards, you're actually getting your money's worth by not having Kenny Lawler here.
Well, and here's more what I meant. Maybe it wasn't easy. For me, it's more like if Lawler, let's say you're talking about Winnipeg's hierarchy at the receiving position. Let's say for argument, because I singled him out, let's say I have Lawler at the top, and then you make your way down the Winnipeg's receivers. The more way I see it, if Lawler comes out of your top, Ellingson, I'm not saying he doesn't replace him, as in Ellingson is now going to be slotted at the top of your hierarchy of receivers in Winnipeg. It just means potentially your hierarchy goes up another step and Ellingson slots in at 2 or 3, however you want to look at it. So it's not to me, it's not a straight across replacement. It just kind of shifts your hierarchy of receivers in Winnipeg, and Ellingson will move in a little bit farther down the totem than suppose where Lawler would have been. And that's more what I was just what it should have said the first time I addressed it, that to me it's not an equal straight across. I don't feel like you don't replace Lawler with Ellingson, more like the hierarchy just changes in Winnipeg. Ellingson still has a spot in there, but he doesn't come in and replace Lawler.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that the Bombers haven't done yet is replace Sergio Castillo. There's still a hole in that kicking game unless somehow Ali Murtada somehow goes to some kind of field goal kicking school over the offseason and gets magically better. One thing we talked about this a couple of episodes ago in regards to, is Winnipeg the new Calgary Stampeders in regards to how they conduct their franchise, and how their franchise will always be considered Grey Cup contender no matter what happens. And I think that kind of aura is kind of wearing off on Calgary as we sit. Nobody's really talking about that anymore. And now Winnipeg is taking over top spot. So it is going to be interesting to see how that operates with the receivers, because with Calgary, you just kind of knew that, okay, well, who cares if they lost Reggie Begelton? Joey Joe Jr. Shabadoo is going to come in and automatically be a 1,000-yard receiver. Nobody knew who DeVaris Daniels was post 2016, and he won Rookie of the Year, and then it led him on to a bunch of free agent contracts. So Calgary's got that. Does Winnipeg have that capability of doing? They've got receivers like Blake Jackson and Kelvin McKnight laying in the wings. So if they end up having breakout seasons, then we can truly say that Winnipeg has completely erased Calgary from the memory of, I guess what you could say, key franchise, the flagship franchise of the CFL at this point. Moving on east, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and by the way, I remember saying this about how people should not be cheerleading injuries and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I saw this poor Brandon Banks, and we'll talk about Brandon Banks when we talk about the Toronto Argonauts. It just kind of triggered me when I talked about Hamilton. Someone replied to Brandon Banks, and Banks should stay off Twitter or sometimes, because I know that he's just kind of reeling in the trolls. But someone went over the edge and was like, "I hope you sever your ACL during training camp." And that's the kind of stuff that we need to get rid of. I know that we're not going to, but come on, just stay classy. I mean, this is the CFL. The guy that you cheer for now, chances are he's not going to finish his career in the CFL, or much less with your team. You got to fully know that. So just, I don't know. I shouldn't even give this person more time on our podcast. But anyway, the Hamilton Tiger Cats made some big moves, specifically on the defensive line. They re-signed a lot of their defense, but the big names that they brought in, Michael Johnson and J.R. Tavai. And one of the things that we kind of talked about on last week's show is the possibility, because of Michael Johnson, that they'd say goodbye to Ted Laurent. But nope, they re-signed Ted Laurent. And that defense, which was number one against the run, which was really good against the run, just got better against the run. I don't see how a lot of teams are going to be able to run up the middle or on the sides, but it's going to be entertaining to see how they try. On the other side of the ball, they lost. I believe they might have lost a couple of offensive linemen, but I know they lost Darius Sirocco. I have to take a look at the transactions page, which for some reason the CFL it was down on free agent frenzy, and I don't know if they are really up to date, because there are some moves that they have as most recent that were done like a day or two before free agency. So I don't know how accurate that is. Offensively, obviously, we know Jeremiah Mazzoli left. Brandon Banks is gone. They have a plethora of good receivers, but I don't know if offensively, I thought if there was going to be a whole defensive on that team, it was on the offense, and I don't know if they did that properly, restoring that. Obviously, there's a lot of time before we go discussing Hamilton, but what's the big move or lack of thereof at Hamilton that jumped out at you for the Tiger Cats?
I just think it was their commitment to getting better on defense. Whether or not they needed that much more of a boost, they did. So good for them. Obviously, the big move for me, and I think it's hard not to single it out, because when quarterbacks go, the quarterbacks get all the attention, right? Everyone loves the quarterbacks. And I guess because I think of it took us till week 3 of the last season to start talking about quarterback problems in Hamilton. When do you pull Mazzoli? When do you start Evans? The luxury they had there to have those two quarterbacks. And I believe at one point when we were still kind of questioning it, the topic probably came up. When do you start moving one of these guys then? When do you start using one of those tools to make improvements? And for me, the fact that you would just let Mazzoli walk away is the most confusing out of them. I don't know if you have a negotiating window, trading away the negotiating rights in the Canadian Football League to a quarterback, but just to let him walk and not get something out of it. Because again, what happens if Dane Evans isn't the guy? Like, he fell from grace pretty quick in Hamilton to start last season. What if you start weak again? What do you have to fall back on now with no replacement like Mazzoli to help get you out of a rut? And Mazzoli didn't start strong, but he came back. And that dynamic, that luxury is now gone for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and to just let him just walk away is a bad move on my part for the Tiger Cats. But whatever, they chose their quarterback, and at the end of the day, they need to do what's best for their football club in their eyes, and that was to let him walk away. So to me, that's going to be the biggest story in Hamilton, whether you don't want to always focus on the quarterbacks or not.
Matthew Schultz was the backup quarterback, who a lot of people are pretty high on him, saying that he is just a starter waiting to blossom. I'm just waiting for that too as well. But don't know if that opportunity is going to come this year, because they are very high on Dane Evans. So aside from injury, I don't know if they're willing to that leash is going to be super, super long in Hamilton, I believe. There's, I mean, it was a different story last year because you had a starter in Mazzoli and a starter in Evans, whereas this year it's and Schultz, he's just a backup, and he's never outside of a couple of games last year. He just wasn't that guy. I was going to say, so before we move on to the Toronto Argonauts, because I feel that this is going to be one of those things that we could talk about forever. Make sure to check out our affiliates, betus.com. Make sure to, there is a link available that we can post on our Twitter page. Promo code JOIN125. Get a 125% sign up bonus with that code, up to $2,500 deposit. That is huge. Make sure that's betus.com. And again, we will post this on our Twitter page in regards to the direct link. The Toronto Argonauts. Toronto Argonauts had a quiet free agent, and I say that in comparison to 2020, and then of course in 2021. Tony, going through it, is there one name that jumped out at you for this for the Toronto Argonauts? And we'll save maybe Andrew Harris on that one, or is Andrew Harris the name that jumps out at you?
I think, you know what, now that the Brandon Banks one dropped, I think that's going to be if you don't want to talk about Andrew Harris, that one was for some reason it feels like a surprise signing going to the Toronto Argonauts, and I don't know why, but it felt like maybe his landing spot was probably still going to be out east. And when you look at the three teams, it just, for some reason, it didn't feel like Toronto was that landing spot, but it was. Overall, I liked their day overall of free agency. Amos is a good addition. So is Ambles, having watched them play in Calgary. I think that's nice, solid depth additions for the Toronto Argonauts. And I don't know, Brandon Banks choosing Toronto for some reason, it just seems odd to me, maybe because of the years of rivalry between the two, that would be his selection. But I mean, it wouldn't be the first Ticat or Argo to go opposite ends of the Highway Series. So we'll see how it works out, but it was definitely one I wasn't expecting.
Before I put in my input, do we have proof that the Toronto Argonauts have more than one scout, and that one scout does not live in Calgary? like the amount of ex-Calgary Stampeders in Toronto is just kind of a little unnerving to me almost. It's just kind of not that there's any I'm not claiming that there's any kind of illegal tampering or any kind of side deals. It just kind of like, okay, you're going to go into free agency. Like, maybe recognize that there's more than one team. I don't know. The Brandon Banks one, I'll say this. The Jagarrett Davis one is huge, because Jagarrett Davis has been top 3 defensive ends in the last couple of years. Not even up for debate. Everybody's going to say Willie Jefferson. A lot of people are going to say A.C. Leonard or even Charleston Hughes. Jagarrett Davis has been top 3, and he's been consistent, and nobody seems to talk about him. I think him alongside what's his name? I want to say Oakley or Oakman, whatever. In Toronto, I think when you put those guys side by side, that Toronto run defense and that pass defense, or at least the front four, is going to be crazy. Like, they're going to give a lot of offensive line nightmares in 2022. So if you haven't shored up, if you're in the East and you haven't shored up that offensive line, do it now. You got to do it now because there's a lot of defensive line in the Eastern Division that are going to give you nightmares. Most notably Toronto and Hamilton. Outside of that, yeah, you mentioned Ambles, you mentioned Amos. Okay, those are great signings, depth signings. There's nothing to write home about. The Brandon Banks and Andrew Harris almost kind of seems it's not like they lost, Winnipeg and Hamilton lost these players respectively to free agency to the Toronto Argonauts. These were players that they just said, hey, you're not in their plans. And both of them ending up in Toronto just seems like Toronto's early 2000s, right? I'm getting crazy 2000 Toronto Argonaut vibes where if you were on the last mile of your career in the highway of career, what have you, you signed with Toronto because a lot of other teams were they had their status quo, they had their guide, and they just didn't fit them, and they just went to Toronto because Toronto didn't have management who knew what they were doing. And I'm just getting those vibes right now.
Yeah, it's very much a Toronto Argonauts thing to do, is go out and get names, because that's what the Argos needed to do, was sell the club, get the biggest names in the league that you can, and throw the double blue on them. So yeah, it definitely was a very Argonauts move. Yeah,
and so knowing that, and knowing who's behind center in Toronto, and that offensive line and their run blocking, I honestly don't know if they're like if there's going to be a serious regression in the CFL, it might be the Toronto Argonauts. I'd hate to say it. If there's Argonaut fans listening to this right now, I'm sorry. It's oh wait, some Ottawa Redblack fans may not like me in a couple of minutes. So I'd be hard pressed to try to convince myself that the Toronto Argonauts are. And this is no slight on Brandon Banks. This is again no slight on Andrew Harris, because I think these are two individuals that probably have a lot of gas left in the tank to produce. I just don't know if Toronto is that ideal situation for them to produce, and that's just me. Anything else that you want to touch on before we move on to the Ottawa Redblacks?
No, I don't bet against Homer McLeod Thompson at all. So
we had a couple of. I didn't want to put you on the spot this week, but I dived into our emails, and someone said, okay, the Toronto Argonauts are grimy. If you could list a Simpsons character for each CFL team, who would it be? Well, that might be something.
If you give me a head up on that one, I can do that.
Yeah, well, we might actually do that next episode, because I figured that's something that if there's one thing that we need to be carefully, exasperate our time with, it's Simpsons references. We have to take our time for that one. The Ottawa Redblacks were the busiest of all teams. Big names that they brought in: receivers B.J. Cunningham, Darvin Adams, Jalen Acklin, Jeremiah Mazzoli, Darius Sirocco. Of course, Sirocco was offensive lineman. I believe Hunter Stewart was signed over from BC. Ucombe Williams from Calgary. And I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to point if they signed. Oh yeah, they had Ty Cranston from Montreal. Also listing some other players here going. Oh yeah, Shaq Johnson, another receiver. Patrick Levels, Money Hunter from Montreal. So they revamped their team, and I kind of touched on it because I was saying that Ottawa Redblack fans are not going to like me, and here's why. You need to pump the brakes on your hope. It's good that you have hope. You have a general manager that realizes, hey, 2019 that was too much. 2021 was still too much. We need to have a severe facelift, and they did that. And I'm not expecting Ottawa to go 3-15 or anything like that. And I'm not expecting Ottawa to be last in the East. But there's been some tweets, there's been some comments expecting Ottawa to go from 4th to 1st. And here's why I want to temper your expectations, Red Black fans. If you go through every positional group on your team, do you equal it better or equal to any of the other groups in the Eastern Division. And I say I'm only singling out the Eastern Division because that's who the majority of your games are going to be against. It's against the Eastern Division. Are you saying that Jeremiah Mazzoli is better than Dane Evans? And that might actually be a thing, right? Like he might be better, but we don't know that because Jeremiah Mazzoli has, it's his reputation where he just falters at the key times, right? So that's that. Running back. Does your running back equal or better than anyone in the East? William Powell. I mean, he had some good games in the West and under Saskatchewan, but he's getting up there in age. Are you going to equal him to Don Jackson Hamilton, Andrew Harris in Toronto, or William Stanback in Montreal? The receivers. Acklin, Adams, Levi Noel, BJ Cunningham. Very good receivers. Leaps and bounds better than what they had last year. Are you going to say that they're better than Montreal's? Nope. Their offensive line, very good, very much improved. I'd venture to say that Montreal's better. I'd even say that Hamilton's better. Defensively, Hamilton's defense and Toronto's front four, and even to an extent the Montreal's front four. I'd wager they are better than Ottawa's as it stands right now. So as good as you did, and it's because you had to, and I'm not saying that you had better options available, because you might have, but you just might not have actually had that opportunity. Just pump the brakes, Red Black fans. I know I'm kind of derailing because we went off the topic here, but I want everybody to be like, if Ottawa goes 7-11, I don't want you to be understanding that, hey, all is lost, right? Because you had hoped for an 11-7 team, but you got a 7-11 team. The 7-11 team is good because you're not 3-15 like you were projected to be in a short season, right? You got better, but you're not at that point yet. That takes time. Do I think that there's hope, that you have right to have hope? Great, yeah, sure. But temper the expectations, please. Tony, any thoughts on what Ottawa did?
I don't even know how to follow that up. I should have went first. I cannot follow that up. Dalts hates Ottawa Redblacks.
I don't hate Ottawa. I don't hate Ottawa.
Wow. That was harsh. Every Red Black, you made every Red Black fan listening cry. Was that your goal, to make people cry? Like that? Yeah, that is mean. But I mean, I don't know. It was a heck of a case there. I mean, because, yeah, Ottawa basically rebuilt an offensive line. They rebuilt their entire receiving core, sweeping changes on the defense. Who knows how that's going to turn out? That was Ottawa just did. There's a lot to unpack with the Ottawa Redblacks right now. I don't hate them as much as you apparently do.
Oh God!
But yeah, there's a lot to unpack with the Redblacks. They've obviously it's hard to say they improved their quarterback. They got a quarterback finally compared to last year. Like, that's not an improvement. You have one now. So good job on that one. And the panic to build a team around. And that was basically what this week was about. Bring in Jeremiah Mazzoli and then build a brand new team around him. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it works out.
Yeah. And I think that's the first thing, right? I mean, obviously, and going back to saying about their hope is that now you have these new faces, and now you have more toys for a guy like Paul LaPolice. And we saw that, his mind, his creativity, you need more than just that, right? I mean, we saw that because, oh man, God, what they had in Ottawa just wasn't good enough. And obviously that team, everybody will be focused on. But I'm just saying, I don't want to make you cry. I'm just saying, pump the brakes. Temper your expectations, please. Because I would much rather someone expect a 6-12 team and then get an 8-10 team. And then at that point, you're like, holy crap, we're not that far away. As opposed to, I'm expecting an 11-7 team, and lo and behold, we get a 6-12 because the team is they're in the right path. they're just not right there yet. And I'm still not confident in Mazzoli. But it's not because they made the wrong moves. They made moves because they had to, right? That's how bad they were. It's just that they're not. Right now, they were in 2021. They were 3 steps behind teams like Hamilton and Montreal. Now Montreal, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. Montreal took some steps back, in my opinion, but Ottawa just took 2 steps forward, no steps back. It's just that Toronto and Hamilton took an additional step. So that's where they are. And as I vomit in my mouth saying that Toronto took a step forward because of, grimy in Toronto. But I just want you to temper your expectations. I know I'm going to get hate mail. Please don't, please. The Montreal Alouettes. The thing that before I go on a rant, I'm not going to go on a rant, but I might trail off here. Tony, who jumped out with the Montreal Alouettes?
Nothing really jumped out. They didn't do anything big like I was kind of hoping to see them do. Nothing impressed. I mean, the only thing that jumps out is the Trevor Harris signing. Like, what the hell? What are you doing? That is a dumb signing. Like, Trevor Harris is not good. Like, why would you bring him back into the fold? That's the only thing I can comment on from free agency for Montreal Alouettes is why in the hell would you touch Trevor Harris at all? That's it.
When I saw this news and it got my brain going, I thought this is either one of those things that when people say that's so CFL-y, like this is one of those situations that should come up tops in the front of your mind because they released Trevor Harris in sometime in January, whatever time it was. They were on the verge of having to pay his $300,000 signing bonus, right? Like they were. He was due that bonus in January, so they cut him so they didn't have to pay it. Then, day 2 of free agency? Or it's not even that, it was day 1 of free agency. They bring him back on a 1-year deal, on a backup contract, no less. And before that, they brought in Dominic Davis from Ottawa. Tell me that you could take 2 steps back without telling me that you could take 2 steps back. Because that's what Montreal did. Who knows what... I know everybody's all in love with Vernon Adams and Kari Jones because they're fan friendly, they're team friendly. Everybody loves them. They want them to succeed. I want them to succeed. It's just that right now when you're looking at them, they didn't make any free agent moves. Hergy Mayala was a decent move, right? Coming home from Calgary, that's a decent move. Mike Jones coming from Winnipeg to anchor that secondary, that's a decent move. So it's not like they did absolutely nothing. They just didn't do anything necessary. And I feel like bringing in Trevor Harris after you cut him and brought in Dominic Davis, I think those are moves that kind of reek. It almost seems like you just, it's like a Band-Aid thing, right? It's kind of like you're doing moves for the sake of making moves, and then somewhere down the line you're gonna look back to this week and be like, holy crap, we made the wrong moves. We should have kept Matthew Shiltz. Now Matthew Shiltz wanted to have opportunities outside of Montreal, so I'm not going to blame Montreal for Shiltz leaving. But when you think that you have a team of Adams and Shiltz, and then you go from Adams to Trevor Harris to Dominic Davis, I'm sorry, you can't convince me that you got better. There's no way you did.